You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. We turn to Aurora Avenue North. It has been the site of escalating gun violence that police say is driven by sex trafficking. Last week, Mayor Katie Wilson, City Attorney Erika Evans, and Council President Joy Hollingsworth held a news conference to announce next steps. They include using civil orders to take guns away from sex traffickers and closing some side streets. Hanging over all of this is whether the city should use its Stay Out of Areas of Prostitution, or SOAP law. The city council reinstated SOAP orders in 2024. These are orders that judges can issue to bar people accused of prostitution-related offenses from Aurora Avenue North. City Attorney Erika Evans vowed not to use or file SOAP orders during her campaign for the position last year. Evans says the orders exacerbate harm for victims of sex trafficking and disproportionately target people of color. We were hoping to hear from the city attorney this week on how she is tackling the issue. Her office told us yesterday that Evans' schedule will not accommodate an interview until July. Still hoping to connect with her then, as soon as she has some time. Today, I'm joined by former City Councilmember Cathy Moore. She represented the area around Aurora Avenue North before resigning in July of last year. Moore is also a former King County Superior Court judge, and she was the sponsor behind Seattle's latest SOAP legislation. Councilmember Moore, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much, Libby. It's a pleasure to be here.
So on Thursday, we heard from City Attorney Erika Evans that her office is going to be using these extreme risk protection orders, or ERPO, to try to take guns away from pimps and sex traffickers. Normally, these are used in cases of domestic violence or mental illness. Basically, people who are not even facing charges yet can have guns taken away if a judge orders it. What do you think about the ERPO approach to the violence on Aurora right now?
Well, I'm all for looking for creative solutions, particularly when we have limited resources. And I have to say, when I first heard City Attorney Erika Evans' suggestion about ERPOs, I thought, I remember entering a fair number of those when I sat on the King County Superior Court bench. And I think it's important to know that ERPOs were really a mechanism in which to be able to take firearms away from people who were legally in possession of a firearm. And because of a mental health crisis or history of domestic violence, or just being in a difficult spot, they were making threats or posing a threat of violence to themselves and to others. And it was a way to sort of work around the Second Amendment right to possess the firearm. And you'll note that one of the findings that the court's required to make is whether or not a behavioral health assessment should be ordered. And so I think if there is, in fact, a situation on Aurora where we have somebody who's a legal gun owner who is in crisis and they are contributing to the gun violence, then you should use an ERPO. But as a tool to deal with the basically gang cartel-driven gun violence that is an intimate part of the sex trafficking trade that's going up there, I think it's going to be an ineffective tool. Because what you really want to do is disrupt and interrupt, and you want to remove those individuals from that area. And the way you do that is because most of the gun violence is being committed by people who are not legally entitled to possess a firearm to begin with, either because they have a felony conviction, they're a minor, the gun is stolen, or it's a ghost gun. That gives the police probable cause to arrest that individual. And as part of that arrest, they can then get a court order ordering surrender of any weapons. And failure to comply with that order is also a criminal offense. And so you sort of do two things at once. You remove the individual from the street, and also you create a court structure for removing the firearms. ERPOs are very difficult. You can get a temporary order, but you have to come back for a hearing. You have to give sufficient notice. Individual has a right to have counsel and to object to the entry of an ERPO. They can petition within a year to have all their firearms returned. There's no way to know what firearms they are actually in possession of. And I think people who are already clearly engaged in illegal gun battles on Aurora are not going to be respectful of a court order that requires them to turn over a certain number of guns that perhaps will be in their possession, and guns in which they can, guns are a dime a dozen. I think that they would clearly rearm quickly. So I don't think it's an effective mechanism for the broader issue of dealing with the problem.
And if you don't know how many guns somebody has, they're not legally registered, it's obviously difficult to even confirm, what they've given up. One advantage of the ERPO, which I heard from some neighbors that Evans' office had mentioned to them, was that the violation of an extreme risk protection order, if you end up having a firearm after that it goes straight to a felony. And so they thought that was a good way to kind of escalate and make this a really serious offense right away if somebody ends up rearming, as you mentioned. Do you find that compelling, that this is jumping to a felony, whereas the penalty for a SOAP violation is a misdemeanor?
Well, that's incorrect. The first violation of an ERPO order is a gross misdemeanor, which is 364 days. It only becomes a felony after your third violation of an ERPO order. So I don't find that a compelling argument because, yes, it's a gross misdemeanor, which is more than patronizing a prostitute, which is just a misdemeanor. But that's a misrepresentation of the effect of an ERPO. And also, one of the things about an ERPO is it makes it illegal for the person to possess a firearm, to seek a concealed pistol license, to register to buy a gun. All of that's already illegal, and many of the people who are engaging in the gun violence are already in those positions. So we're not doing anything new.
So you led the charge on the city council to reinstate the city's SOAP law. So that stands for Stay Out of Area of Prostitution. Also, at the same time that SOAP and SODA, the Stay Out of Drug Area law, was passed, the prostitution loitering statute came on the books again. City Attorney Evans has said that SOAP and SODA laws are racist and ineffective. Her office is now not enforcing SOAP orders or SODA orders. You've been vocal about the need for these orders, and you've touched on this so far with us in the conversation today. But make the case for SOAP orders. Why are they an effective policy?
Well, let me just say the first thing that I would say is that there isn't one magic, excuse the word here, bullet for this. This is a complicated, long-standing problem, and it really does require a multi-pronged approach. It requires many, many different types of tools. It requires many different government actors to be fully on board and fully pursuing everything within their power. So I think it's important to keep that in perspective, that there isn't one thing that's going to turn all of this around. However, I would respectfully disagree with City Attorney Evans about SOAP orders. So the difference between the order that we have in place now, that we got in place in 2024, is that for the first time, the Aurora corridor from 85th to 145th has been designated a stay out of prostitution area. And it is now legally recognized in law as an area in which somebody can be ordered to stay out of. In the past, what happened was if somebody was arrested for patronizing a prostitute and they were convicted, they had to be convicted before a SOAP order could be entered. It was up to the judge to decide what the geographic boundaries were of where that individual could come back. And so, again, it was very broad and vague. And also the data, we don't really have any good data about where the majority of the SOAP orders entered after conviction were entered. And we know that commercial sexual exploitation is not limited to the Aurora corridor. It's downtown, it's in South Seattle. So these orders that were being entered, we don't know whether there were enough resources in order to effectively enforce them, like you do now with having this designated area. It's specific. The police know where they have to monitor, and they have the ability to do that. The other thing that I think is really important, and I did look to Shoreline because they have had a SOAP law in effect since 1996. And I spoke with the chief of police there and asked them about that. And they said it was very effective. And in the beginning, it required a lot of enforcement. Once they were able to sort of get a handle on things and they were able to maintain the area, just with people knowing that there was a possibility of being arrested and the possibility of having a soap order entered. And then later on, there were structural environmental changes made to Aurora up there that also helped with the maintenance of keeping that, for the most part, free from the sex trade.
Yeah, I want to just jump in there because I think our colleague here at KUOW, Amy Radel, reported on this. And basically, in recent years, the soap order in Shoreline hasn't been used that much. And that the city leaders there were pointing to, as you say, urban planning, landscaping, different kinds of city policy that they felt had been providing this safer place. And that's why you didn't see prostitution and sex trafficking once you crossed the border from Seattle to Shoreline. But you spoke to the chief of police there, and they said basically that this was a baseline that was set, a message that was sent that said, you're not able to operate as a sex trafficker here, you would face arrest. And so then that makes the law eventually less, active because that message has gone out. Is that the argument that that you're trying to make here?
Yes, and I would also point out that they reassessed the law, as your colleague noted, in 2022. They haven't actively enforced soap since 2018, I believe, but they reassessed whether they should repeal it in 2022 and decided that it was worthwhile to keep it on the books. But the other point that I wanted to make was that when I spoke with the chief of police about, well, is there anything that you would have done differently? And her response was, we should not have targeted the sellers. And so I took that on board in my conversations with her and then with survivor groups themselves. And that's why we made it specific that the soap orders only apply to the buyers and to, for the lack of a better word, the pimps, the people who are coercing the women and girls out there on the street. This is it's a very different creature than what we had in the past. And I think that if you look at what's happened in Shoreline, you can say that soap orders are effective. And the important thing about a soap order that we have in place now is that a court can enter it. And 2 points I would make here. One is that prosecutor's office has to actually ask the court to enter a soap order. The judge isn't going to, on their own, enter a soap order. They're going to follow the lead of the prosecuting attorney. So the city attorney's people need to ask for the order. And then the city attorney needs to make it very clear that they are going to enforce the orders that have been entered. If you make it clear, your public message is, we're not going to enforce these orders, people are not going to comply with them. But the difference is that you can get a soap order after an arrest. And it is the only tool that we now have that allows SPD to make sure that buyers are not coming back into this corridor. And again, that goes to the underlying goal here, which is to interrupt, disrupt, and send a very clear message that within this space of the city, it is not legal for you to be here. It's not legal for you to be here to buy another human being for the purpose of your sexual gratification. And if you do so, there will be legal criminal consequences for that behavior. And so my question is, when we have an epidemic up there of human trafficking, exploitation, gun violence, Seattle is the second most active sex market track in the nation. Why would you not use absolutely every tool available to you to attempt to disrupt, interrupt, and shut that down? And if after a good faith effort, it proves to be ineffective, then move on. But don't make a categorical position that has real life consequences until you know for a fact that this new and improved version that came about through consultation with Shoreline and with survivor groups isn't going to work.
Can I ask you to respond to this idea that these exclusion zones, the stay out of area of prostitution and stay out of drug zones, push the problem to the margins and they just move things to a different neighborhood? What do you think about that criticism, that this is just moving the problem down the road?
I guess I don't necessarily agree with that. I think, and again, that's why we need a multi-pronged approach. So we need to get the buyers off the streets. We need to get the traffickers who are engaged in gun violence off the streets. And we need to provide pathways for the women and girls who are being trafficked. We need to get them off the streets as well. And we have not done a good job of any of that. And even though we've appropriated quite a bit of money for our human services department and community-based organizations to engage in that work. To date, they have really not been doing the on-the-ground work of providing 24/7 diversion and assistance with SPD to getting those girls and women off the street into emergency housing, into detox, to a hospital, helping return them home. So we have to do all of it. Of course, we're not going to get rid of it right away. But the more that we do that, the less I'm concerned about it just going down the street.
Cathy Moore is a former city council member and former King County Superior Court judge. She was the sponsor of the stay out of area of prostitution legislation that brought that law back on the books. We've invited City Attorney Evans on the show in order to talk about her perspective on this. She was initially, we were in talks to have her on this week. It looks like now her schedule is not going to accommodate an interview for several weeks. We are still hoping to connect with the city attorney on this. Councilmember Moore, thank you very much for being here and for explaining your perspective on the stay out of area of prostitution law and what's happening on Aurora.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity.
And we still want to hear from you. What do you think about the city's recent actions regarding Aurora Avenue North? What do you want to see from your public officials? Send an email to the show with your weigh-in at soundside@kuow.org. You can also leave us a voicemail at 206-221-3213. Again, that's 206-221-3213 or soundside@kuow.org. Thanks for listening to Soundside. Don't forget you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at kuow.org or on your favorite podcast app.